Hello.
Good afternoon.
Not quite afternoon, unless you're in another time zone.
Hello.
Hey there. It's interesting to see how Teams does this webinar thing. They're probably late to the game of webinar platforms, but adding
Yeah,
quickly.
is it working out okay so far?
We'll see how it goes. I mean, each one's different. Each one offers a little bit of a thing. Some are pretty sophisticated, pretty advanced.
Sarah, is there anything you want me to do during this time?
I think we're good. We'll just give it 2 more minutes and then we will get started.
Oh, shoot. No, I'm not sharing yet.
Okay. Christian, are we ready to get started?
1:30.
Okay.
And yes, ready. And I sent you an email too, that you had requested.
Okay. So good morning, afternoon. Thank you for joining the first in our series of webinars. My name is Sarah Strahan, and I am a project coordinator at Berger Consulting Group. Before we get started, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. The mics will be muted during the webinar, but I would like to invite you all to turn on your cameras. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat feature to post those questions. We'll be monitoring those questions throughout the webinar and do have time at the end to answer some of those questions. Any unanswered questions will be addressed after, and those responses will be sent out. The presentation and the recording, along with a small survey, will be shared after this webinar. Thank you again for joining. I would like to now hand it off to our presenter, Christian Berger.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. Delighted to see so many folks on this call. Some I know, some are new to me. I know that there's a lot of interest in this topic right now. It's very timely. Companies are considering their options for ERP, deciding when they need to replace and with what. So I've got a lot of material to cover today. I will be moving at a fairly brisk pace. My goal would be that each of you is able to take away maybe 2 or 3 good ideas in helping you plan your journey, your ERP journey. We do have quite a variety of companies on the call. There's some publicly traded, large-scale billion-dollar companies and some smaller, $50 to $100 million construction firms on here as well. So obviously not everything will be appropriate for everybody, but we're going to try and cover the ground. As a bit of background, Berger Consulting itself has been around for 25 years, maybe 26 now. I've been in the industry for maybe closer to 35, always in this tech space. We are an independent firm from the software company, so we don't represent any products or vendors or VARs. We are independent and objective, and hopefully will provide a balanced perspective on things. Now, unlike in prior events, when I've been asked to speak by a publication or a conference, I have the freedom, I suppose, to speak more openly, and I will. Trying to provide you guys with some valuable insight. So what are we going to be covering today? Let's see. So I want to give you some initial background on the industry itself, where we've been, and I think somewhat where we're headed. I think that the use case for ERP has changed, or could change for some of your organizations. So I'll be talking about that as well, because I think that's important, that we're not just shifting ERP from what we do today to a newer platform, but in fact, reimagining, if you will, the role of ERP. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between an all-in-one solution versus best-in-class. We're going to look at the underlying tech stack and why that's important, more so than it was perhaps in the past. Some steps on selecting and implementing ERP. And I've got 2 polling questions that I'm going to run by you during this webinar. So fingers on mouse, there'll be a little question that pops up, and we just want you to respond accordingly. And I do have some time for questions at the end. If you have a question in the moment, like what does this mean, hit chat, and Sarah will break in and ask me to clarify. If it's a question that's really more discussion oriented and something we can save for the end, she'll prioritize that, and we'll cover that. So without further ado, I wanted to start off with sharing with you just a recent client situation that we had. We were working with a pretty large mechanical contractor, $600 million in revenue, and they were multi-division, multi-location, and they were on a legacy platform. They were mainly dissatisfied with the existing platform. But there was also a feeling that the organization wasn't using the platform very well. So there was tension around, should we really spend X dollars to change out when we're not using the system we have very well? There were no standards in terms of process. They were a very autonomous operation, like most construction companies. So the idea of getting a single new ERP platform and trying to harmonize business processes to the extent possible was challenging. The client actually asked us to do an ROI assessment on some of the business processes. So we evaluated service management, billing, contracting, procurement, and billing, maybe, I think it was. Anyway, we ended up evaluating the business processes, how much value could exist in those business processes. Ultimately made the case that they could and should move forward with new ERP, and went through a standard selection and got them on their way. This kind of strategic validation, I think, occurs in a lot of organizations when they start to question ERP. And I would say, before you go to conferences and start getting demos and kicking tires and doing all that, you really need to step back and ask yourself, what are we trying to accomplish with this solution? There's no getting around an ERP system, but it is one that can take several different tangents, if you will, and that are pretty significant. when you think about it, almost everybody in a construction organization will be in the ERP to some extent, and they rely very heavily on the data. Auditability, controls, all very important. So stepping back for a moment and evaluating where are we trying to go and what are we trying to achieve is a pretty worthwhile question before we just jump right into RFPs and demos. So that was a recent. I mean, this is kind of commonplace now. So where did we come from? A lot of you may have come from an organization where you had this initial ERP footprint. It was very, it was very basic. It got the job done. Financial statements, vendors paid, employees paid, basic job cost information. And this is where a lot of companies started, and for some may still be. And almost all construction ERPs began with this kind of rather basic footprint. For those that are small and maybe still on QuickBooks, this would be the transition you would make. So going from QuickBooks to Foundation, Computer Ease, Sage 100, when the ERP starts to have the formation of some basic construction functionality rather than just being generic. So then these products matured and we added in additional applications. So now, instead of just GLAP, AR billing, we've actually we have an equipment management application, purchasing, subcontract management. So it's extended, and that was generally a good transition. So one of the questions then that really comes to mind is this idea of large footprint versus small footprint. Now, footprint is just a shorthand way of saying what are the applications that are involved and where do they exist. So in a large footprint ERP, you would have all of your construction applications, all of your accounting applications in one system. CMIC, Coins are two good examples. Vista are good examples of that, where everything is kind of built in. Now, don't assume that to mean everything is best in class, but everything is built in. All the integration, all the data is in one house. Security, sign-on, it's all in one house. That has certain advantages, particularly if you have a lighter IT department that can't take on all this complex integration. When you move to the right, to the small footprint scenario, now you have basically similar to the diagram before, where it's smaller, fewer applications. In the ERP, it still handles all the accounting functions it has to. However, we've moved HR outside and tied it in. Project management is outside and we tied it in. Purchasing, even procurement, is outside and integrated back in. Service management might be outside and tied back in. So now we're saying let's let each department choose their applications best in class and tie it back to our ERP solution. Now, that looks nice and tidy on a PowerPoint slide, but there's a lot of complexity in doing that. But it is solvable. And at the end of the day, now you've given each department the tools, the technology that they actually need. So there is and I'm not sure that I would say it's an all or nothing proposition here. You could have a large footprint with one or two applications outside. You could have a small footprint with a couple of applications inside the ERP. So there's not an absolute line here. But it is sort of, I would say, instructive to think about whether or not the ERP is going to be, whether or not you're trying for fully integrated, or you can be satisfied with small footprint, because that might change your shortlist decisions. Now, when we move to this large footprint scenario, what does that look like? Well, now we've got all these accounting applications, everything in dark blue and most of even the gray has financial impact on jobs, on inventory, on general ledger. And so this is a fully integrated scenario with all the applications built in. Again, Coin, CMIC being good examples. Now that can be a more expensive proposition because typically ERPs are more expensive than some of these standalone solutions. Okay, so then where do we go from there? When you move, so let me do this. This footprint is ideally suited for a construction firm in the traditional sense. So job cost is king. We've got procurement, we've got AI billing, we've got some subcontract management, maybe equipment services in there as well. But when you move to something like this, now we're looking at a larger enterprise. This could be 500 million to $1 billion and over, who really cannot be on a tier 2 platform. So they go to tier 1, tier 1.5. Let me explain that. Tier 1 is more like SAP, Oracle, JD Edwards, those types of platforms. Those are large scale. They are meant for Fortune 500 and more expensive to license, more expensive to operate, and requires more technical support. But the tier 1.5 is a small group of software companies that are trying to fill that gap in between tier 1 and tier 2. The people that I associate in that realm would be somebody like Dynamics or IFS. Now, both of those have been tuned for construction. They didn't start in construction, but they've had the construction and construction functionality built out for them. So in the case of Dynamics, there's a VAR that is probably the leading construction VAR for Dynamics. And they've done a lot of build out of the functionality that was missing for construction into the Dynamics platform. Likewise, IFS has made a pretty strong commitment to the construction space here in the U.S., and they've done a lot of build out of that their platform as well. However, note in here, MRP and shop floor. Now, for those of you that do any prefabrication, mechanicals, utility, electrical, at some point you're going to need MRP, shop floor kind of technology. That function today probably exists in spreadsheets or dry erase board or some other kind of system. There's third-party systems that do this as well, but it's not integrated back to ERP. So the advantage of these tier 1.5 solutions is that they have service management and shop floor built in. The traditional vendors that we looked at a minute ago, like CMIC and Coins, don't do that. And so if you envision your firm moving more heavily into inventory control, shop floor, more sophisticated procurement, service management, then having a scalable platform that looks something like this could make more sense. Now, you don't go into this sort of lighthearted. This is a big lift, but it really positions your firm for where you're headed and where you're likely to head, where the industry seems to be heading, which is to say more prefab. Okay. So got my first polling question for you. So pay attention on your monitors. And those of you on the calls that are not, let's just say if you're with BCG, I don't want to contaminate the results here. So just our contractor friends on the call, are you satisfied with your current ERP solution? And I made it a forced choice. So either very satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied, meaning you're in considering leaving for any one of a variety of reasons. So give you a minute to click on your response and submit. Sarah, will we see that pop up as a?
So it is in the chat, and Christian, it looks like we are somewhere in between somewhat satisfied and somewhat dissatisfied.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, okay, people are filling in still. Yeah, so interesting. So 4%, which represents one value, is very satisfied. Congratulations. Um, the dissatisfied is 20%, which is probably about what I would have expected. And then a balance between somewhat dissatisfied and somewhat satisfied. Um, it's hard for ERP to get raving reviews, I would say, um, compared to other very specific applications. But we definitely should be more in the realm of somewhat satisfied, if not very satisfied. And I think this is indicative of the fact that we're on some older technology for a lot of our ERPs, and the newer ones have not yet I mean, they're getting traction, but they're not fully deployed yet. So that's interesting. Thank you. Thank you for responding too. Okay, let's do this. So one of the questions that comes out of this, almost, this is another trend that will impact your ERP choice. Some of the ERPs that are trying to fill the space, Acumatica would be one. I think IFS might be another one. Sage Intacct possibly is another one. Don't have mature payrolls built in. Everybody that has some history in this industry knows that we struggled with uh, third-party payroll. Our payroll and construction is highly complicated. Davis-Bacon prevailing wage work, unions, multiple jurisdiction, reciprocity. I mean, it goes on. And so, because of that, the third-party payrolls have not been successful in the past. I would say that in the last 2 years, those platforms have made some strides, and some new entrants have proven more capable. So companies have largely outsourced their HR to third-party specialized products, Workday, Bamboo, Acora. There are a number of those out there. Now, some of those actually require you to run their payroll as well. And I think you've really got to evaluate. If you're a general contractor, let's say you're a general contractor working in one state, and so you've mainly got PMs, a lot of salaried personnel, maybe you're non-union, don't work outside of your particular geography too often, then a third-party payroll actually might work okay. But you really got to insist upon a level of integration back to your ERP, because it's not only about rate determination and getting checks out. A lot of systems can do that, but it's also about getting the labor cost out of the payroll and into the job cost system, potentially into the billing system as well, if you're doing a lot of T&M work. Now, in addition to that, you've got these third-party payroll HR systems and third-party time card applications. So some companies are using Procore, some are using Austin Lane or WorkMax, some are using Rumbix, some are using even well, there's other platforms out there for timekeeping, and they vary in sophistication. Some are biometric, geofencing, clock in, clock out, where you heard on the job, California break time. I mean, they've got all of that capability built in, and some are very rudimentary, like how many hours did you work today, and where do we code your time? So you have to decide how sophisticated you want to be. And then you've got the added complexity of potentially taking the time card solution and integrating it back to the payroll if you go outside, or to the ERP if you keep it inside. So just pointing out that the complexity here should be thought through, and don't make any assumptions, particularly when you hear, oh yeah, we can do that. So safety solutions sometimes get factored in, and even LMS now is gaining popularity. Now that's not necessarily inside of ERP, but it could be part of an HR platform. And the LMS solutions are pretty important because you want a platform on which you can build out your training material for your new ERP, and what includes best practices. So this is an impact on the payroll and, on the ERP decision. Okay, what else has changed in our landscape here? One of the things that I think it's interesting, back when I started, probably back in the 90s and early 2000s, um, uh, ERP was largely the domain of accounting. You had a controller and his or her team using the system every day, and operations would be given a report once a month. Here's your report, job cost report, and that's all there was. And we evolved that somewhat by letting operations in to do inquiry, do their own reports, maybe even generate an invoice for a customer in the ERP. But fundamentally, this was a system that was the domain of accounting. Today, I would say that that profile has changed, and now we have a ERP system that is probably half operations and operations support, like equipment, procurement, and what have you. And then the other half, or 40% maybe, is really in the accounting domain. And that, excuse me, changes the use case and who we're trying to satisfy. And it also changes the economics, because for every one accounting user, you might have 3, 4, 5, 10 operational users. So depending on how the software is licensed, that can have a pretty significant impact. Now we're going to look at a couple of alternatives to that, but this change is pretty substantial. Okay. So if you are operations, in scenario one had accounting inside of the ERP and project management was separate. There were attempts in the past to integrate the two, but all of the cost management function existed inside of the ERP. So project managers had to straddle the two, and they would go into their project management system for RFIs and submittals and meeting minutes and sharing files and drawings. And then they would pop into their ERP a couple times a month and do cost forecasting, update budgets, change orders, that sort of thing. And they might have a time card solution that actually, like a heavy job or a tracks or something that came from estimating, that they could actually look at, field productivity with. In the second scenario, we're seeing more of a movement to put cost management into project management. Think of what Procore is trying to do there. So now, and I think that Innate does this. I think that Autodesk Construction Cloud's doing this. So we're pulling cost data out of the book of record, the ERP, and pushing it into the project management. And what this means now is my project managers can live in my project management solution. They can do RFI, submittals, meeting minutes, change orders, and monitor their job progress. Now, this is something that has to be handled from an IT perspective, but it's allowing your project managers to be inside of a single platform, which they like. And it also reduces my count, my footprint inside of my ERP, which can have a rather pleasant cost impact on things. So I'm seeing this second scenario as maybe a likely one for the future. Okay. Roll up and consolidation. One of the things that's happened is we're getting more roll up and consolidation in the industry. So I've seen a lot of private equity and even publicly traded firms basically grabbing lots of small contractors and bring them into a single platform or single entity. Now, some of those are buying but leaving alone. So if you bought my mechanical contracting company and I was using, say, Spectrum, and then I bought another one that was on Coins, I might leave those two alone and just consolidate at the general ledger level. But some of these are actually trying to get economy of scale. So they'll do a roll up and actually then pick the ERP platform that they're on, that they like the best is the Future, and then migrate each new successive entity onto that platform. And that allows for some standardization. and efficiency. So I'm seeing that happening. We're still seeing some of the firms using solutions like Hyperion and maybe Profix and other large-scale financial reporting tools to do the ultimate roll up. And I'm also, it's interesting, I'm seeing more of a shared service model, which makes sense because instead of having six AP departments, I might actually have one AP department at the top, including treasury. I might let clerks at the local level enter invoices, but I'm going to process them and pay them at central. So there is some attempt at economy of scale in these roll up and consolidations. Now, what else is going from a shared service perspective? These are all departments and functions that I've seen get rolled up into a corporate level entity, and they provide support to, the operating company level. And there isn't a right answer on this one, I'm afraid. I think that it's more about how you're structured, what resources you need. But I mean, HR is a logical one. Why do we don't need HR personnel unless you're very big? We don't need HR personnel at every single office. We just need an HR department that standardizes policies and procedures, handles benefits, PTO, all of that. So I think that as firms grow and are in this sort of consolidated model, it is changing the organization a little bit. Okay, so where are we headed then from an ERP's perspective? Well, back in the, I hate saying that, but back in the old days, we had this ERP platform that was a typically client server architecture, fairly structured code, meaning here's how you do a change order, here's how you do a billing. And they had reports already defined. They gave you tools like Crystal Reports or SSRS to develop reports. But fundamentally, no workflow engine, no data and analytics platform, not a ton of flexibility. Maybe I can add a field here or there, but I couldn't really modify much. So this was a fairly, let's say, tightened down platform. And this is what a lot of firms are on today. And probably this structure is what a lot of firms are railing against today, why they're not more satisfied. Now, why have ERP vendors been unable or unwilling to move? They did once. When we were back in the 2000s, a lot of these vendors went from Windows and client server. They made a move to not cloud-based, but at least internet-based, browser-based solutions. And some of those are still with us and functioning pretty well. The ones that were on client server and couldn't move or didn't move are the ones that are probably challenged a little bit. Now we have cloud platforms that allow those vendors to host, but it doesn't change the fundamental underlying architecture of those systems. Why didn't they move? This is 6 million lines of code, highly integrated, highly configured. I mean, it is best case, highly complex. And so rewriting perhaps wasn't even in the cards financially because it would have been a 4 to 6 year kind of roadmap and required a lot of capital. So that's the challenge. I think the new entrants who are all cloud-based, some of them even multi-tenant, just said, you know what, we're not going to bring all that forward. We're starting over, or we're going to start with a cloud-based platform and build it for construction. That's what Intact did, Sage. So this is where we were. Now, today, I think we have more cloud-based ERP, and a lot of companies are implementing what's called middleware. Think Dell Boomi, Jitterbit, MuleSoft, solutions that can tie to the ERP, and integrate with other third-party applications you may be using in the organization. So that's a pretty significant change there. But one of the things you can't see from this is by moving from left to right, you just eliminated all your infrastructure. So you don't have to have servers, you don't have to have you have backup, but not DR. All that's handled by the cloud provider. And they can scale up and down as your organization needs. So the management of the underlying infrastructure is taken over by somebody else. And then the data layer may exist within your organization if you arrange it. Now, one of the things we probably don't have time for today, but one of the risks of all this is, if you move to a cloud-based solution, who owns your data and how can you get your data? I've worked with a few that are in this cloud-based domain, and it seems like getting data out on any kind of a scaled basis to populate a data warehouse is very challenging. So I think the ownership of data is something that all of us have to be mindful of as we move into these cloud environments. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the marketplace. Maybe this is what everybody came for. So on the left, I would argue, are a lot of our legacy solutions. Now, I'm not using legacy in a pejorative sense at the moment, but I think that everyone would agree that there are limitations in today's digital environment to some of this legacy architecture. Now, let me point out the good part. There is way more construction and accounting functionality in these systems on the left than there are on the systems on the right. So we are making a trade-off here. We are moving from mature functional systems to mature technical platforms, capable platforms, and we are going to have to wait patiently for the vendors on the right to catch up on the construction functionality. Now, I'm being very broad here, generalizing, but I think it's appropriate. The vendors that I think have kind of bridged decently between the two, CMIC and Coins. And not to suggest that Spectrum and Vista haven't made some attempts to get there from a hosting standpoint, but functionally not being built out as much anymore. They're focused more on building around the application to enable integration, service management, HR, other project management. Now, on the right are the true cloud-based platforms that are offered up single tenant, multi-tenant, but fully hosted. And I mentioned Acumatica. Oracle is up there mainly as JD Edwards, and Dynamics, certainly from Microsoft. IFS is there, and Sage Intacct. Those are the vendors that give at least a tip of the hat to construction, some way more than others. But depending on the size of your company, the sophistication of your demands, where you're at in terms of your life cycle of ERP, those are names that you ought to be familiar with. So this is the marketplace. Now, I've heard NetSuite bandied about. I just haven't seen great traction yet, at least for any contractor of size. When we get to questions, if you have questions about another company, another vendor that's not up here, I'm happy to address. Sometimes when I'm speaking in more public forum, I can't be as open and candid, but since this is our show, we can be. So pretty important to know this landscape. Okay. Now another dynamic that I want to emphasize a little bit is a change in focus from this idea of applications. So I got a purchasing application, I got a billing application, I got a payroll application, job costs, and so forth. Companies are starting to realize that in order to gain efficiency that we really need and to have better quality of data, I need to look at process end to end. And we've seen that probably for the last 3 to 5 years, just an extreme emphasis on process improvement and not just going out and buying new technology, but in fact, laying down processes like procurement in this case, and looking at how data moves all the way through, how many systems it touches, how many people are involved, how much duplicate entry there is, and asking the question, can we streamline this? And how can we streamline it? What's required? And then setting about finding the technology platform to support those functions. So I just listed a few end-to-end processes here, but built out the procure to pay to give you an example of a process that should really in one system move from bill of material that was done when you estimated the work through RFQ, requisition, POs, receiving invoice and payment. Like that should be an entire work stream. Right now, for many organizations, this would be, cobbled together over maybe 3 or 4 platforms that included spreadsheets and email. So when you're looking at ERP, I think one of the questions you have to ask is, who's the customer? And who's the decider? I would say back a few generations, or at least one generation, when it was largely the domain of accounting, CFO, controller would make the decision largely for them. And they might let somebody else from operations have a look, but it was the domain of accounting. Now we've got operations with a seat at the table, and fundamentally, IT needs to be there as well. We had a client back a few years ago that we assisted with a selection, and they were a very big general contractor. And they looked at a very construction-oriented ERP, and then they looked at a very technical platform that did construction also. And the operations guys came away loving the first one that had change orders, forecasting, billing, AIA, all of that built in. And then they liked that, but IT and accounting liked the other solution because it was stronger for them. And to be stronger for IT meant that IT could do more for the organization. So if you've got a strong, capable IT department that wants to serve, then handcuffing them with a tightly architected platform that doesn't allow for report writing, integration, form development, workflow is a problem. And so in that case, the organization opted for the second, the more technical, stronger accounting platform, and fundamentally tried to make operations happy with reporting and other customizations. So when you go in, it is important to know who we're trying to serve. Okay, so quickly on technical backend. I think back when we had parity among our vendors in terms of their underlying database, code structure, mobile, et cetera, the technology was less important to the decision, and it was all about features and functions. Today, though, the tech stack in these ERPs matters a lot. Some of them are way more advanced around their integration capability. So they're pre-configured for integration. They have APIs. They have published schema. I mean, it's all right there and available. So that's kind of an important consideration. Here's one, just the whole environment. Are you going to get a test environment along with a production environment? Some systems, oddly enough, are not providing for test, which is, to me, not a good situation, because that means any upgrades automatically happen without you having a chance to test them. And if you ever wanted to go in to say, well, what if we change this configuration? How would that work? You don't have an environment to do that in. You're doing it in production. And we just don't like people using production as a sandbox. So having both environments is pretty important. Now, some of the platforms are much more advanced in terms of dashboard and BI, and we think that's good and necessary. And again, so putting more weight on the technology. Security we've seen a lot of different things. Mobile functions, some firms are actually, have a very robust marketplace for developing mobile apps and tying them back into ERP. So you can have QA/QC forms, you can have safety forms, you can have percent complete capture. I mean, all of these things can be done via mobile, receiving PO receiving in the field, time cards, et cetera. So if they have rather than just being web-based, actually having a proper mobile platform would be good. Role-based workflow. All of these things are part of that technical backend, and I do think that IT has a role here in evaluating whichever ERP is being looked at, considered, to make sure that your standards as IT are in fact being addressed. Okay, so polling question 2, last one, and I just want to kind of get a sense here. If you are considering changing ERPs in the next 12 to 18 months, are you expecting to change your ERP strategy also, or simply modernize what you do today? The modernize is what we would call lift and shift. You're going to take your old legacy platform and just move it to a new platform that's contemporary, but not going to change business process, not going to change footprint. Maybe it's still going to be operating largely without a bunch of integrations. So that's lift and shift, modernize only. The other ones could be extend the footprint, use this ERP as an impetus to process improvement, get greater degrees of integration, greater use by operations. These are choose all that apply. So let's see what everybody thinks there. Interesting. So only one is up, 2 are modernize only. So that lift and shift approach, quite a few, and this is good to see, quite a few are seeing this as a means for process improvement. So that's a good sign. Greater degree of integration means the technology stack is going to be very important in the process. And 10 of the firms are actually seeing it as a means to get greater response by operations. So interesting and somewhat confirming what I might have guessed. So thank you for that. Okay. So selection process, I'm not going to read through all of these, but I'm going to highlight a few things I think are pretty important in the overall. And Sarah, I'm going to try and wrap by maybe 10 minutes so we can have some questions. If you have questions that you want to put on the table, type them up to Sarah. So selection, definitely want to have a selection team. Try and grab 6 to 8 people from throughout the organization that can be a part of this overall team. If you're a big corporation, you might have maybe 10 to 12. You want a body that can stay together through the whole process to evaluate, get demonstrations, call references, through the whole process. This should not fall to one department, certainly not to IT. You want to solve some of these or try and decide some of these strategic questions before you just launch RFPs. You want to do a good job of defining your requirements. Now, this is where a lot of legwork has to take place. You've really got to dig into payroll, into billing, into job cost, into equipment and work orders and such, and figure out what do you want. Now, the challenge is if you've had somebody in place in a position for a long period of time on the old system, all they know is that system. And so what they're going to define as a requirement is what they do today. And so, I mean, I don't want to promote us necessarily here, but when we do this, we bring in fresh ideas, new directions, current state. And so I think you've got to have folks, you can do this as well if you bring people on the team who might have come from another organization, who can share what they did elsewhere. You can talk to peer groups and find out what they're doing. But you definitely want to think beyond what you do today, because then you're just doing the lift and shift, and that's not going to accomplish as much as you'd like. RFP, I think you know what those look like. Demonstrations. In an ERP, we target anywhere from a day to 2 days, typically two, for a full-blown ERP demo. You should, I mean, unless you're a very small organization, you should not be buying software off of an hour, or 2 hour demo. It's just not sufficient to get into all of the details. We also think you should have very detailed, tight scripts around the demo, and make sure that it's consistent. So whatever you want to see in a demo, you look at product one and you look at product two with the same script. That allows you to do a comparison. If the vendors are left to their own devices, they'll elect to do a great dog and pony show showing all the things that they do well, but they might gloss over some of the things that are important to you, and they may not have as effective in the software. So the standardized script is pretty important. Last thing I'll mention in here is proof of concept. In the event that there's something very important to your organization, let's say a complex billing problem or how to do work orders or something like that, and in the demo you didn't see it satisfactorily, and you want to know how they actually cover it, you can set up or arrange for what's called a proof of concept conference room pilot. Basically, this is when you give the vendor some of your data and you say, look, I want you to put this data in your system, and then we want to spend 2-4 hours, maybe a day, going through end to end how this is going to work. We might even want to have fingers on keyboard. You really want to see it under a microscope in detail to ensure that they understood your requirement and you understand their capability. So that's a proof of concept. I wouldn't start there, but if you need to tie off on something important after the demos, don't be afraid to ask that. We certainly promote the use of references. Licensing is very important now. Licensing used to look different than it does today. It used to be a little easier to negotiate. I think that the vendors remain flexible on negotiations on some things, but not on others. When you get to large publicly traded software publishers, your flexibility, their flexibility in modifying licensing is close to none. So, but they are willing to flex on price, on payment terms, sometimes warranty a little bit. So you just got to know where you've got some room for flexibility. Okay, licensing. This probably could be an entire hour-long conversation by itself, but make sure you know your user counts, indemnification terms, termination. I've seen agreements where termination could be done without notice and without time to cure. If you do something accidental, and they have the right to terminate your agreement. And if you don't have good data access, I mean, the vendors typically don't pull that string, but it's not good governance to be exposed like that. These vendors are trying now to create increases, annual increases. We didn't used to have that. It was fairly stable pricing. But now with SaaS agreements, you are subject to basically whatever price you're going to pay. And then I've seen 5 and 7% increases year over year. What I prefer is that I have a 3-year cap on pricing. So if I agree at 50,000, 100,000, 500,000, whatever it is, I agree on that. That's going to hold for 3 years. And then I get the right, then I get the protection of maybe a 3% increase year over year. or CPI, whichever is lower or higher, whatever you want to do. But don't leave it too open, because these can start to get to be big numbers. And this is another technique I like to use sometimes. So if I can't get satisfaction on my warranty condition, so they want you to start paying for software day one. You are not getting any value day one. So I don't like you paying for software day one. They will sometimes extend that out 3 months, 6 months. That's still not quite enough, but it's a move in the right direction. But if they want you to pay for all the software up front, then I want you to reduce your user count. So if you were originally going to license 50 users and pay for that, then I would say, and they're not moving on warranty, then I would say bump it down to 10. License 10 for 9 months to a year during the implementation, and then reserve the right at that time to increase the user count at some predetermined price, hopefully discounted. So now you're a little bit protected. You're only paying for what you need during implementation, and you are, if let's say it just goes completely south and you need to be out of the contract, you're not tied into an expensive 3-year agreement. So just think about those things as you try and license up. Also, make sure you understand how you have access to the APIs for integration, because you will need those, and it is important. And is there a charge for using them? And is the charge based on data volumes? That can be a factor as well. This is an area that I'm happy to talk with any of you offline. We spend a lot of times with these agreements, and there's more than I can share in this short call. Okay, I need to move us along. The trade, your trade matters. So if you're a general contractor, there are systems I wouldn't necessarily recommend, because they're okay for certain things you need, but they're not great. And they may actually miss some things. If you're a mechanical with prefab, then certain vendors are good for that and others are less so. And heavy highway is even more so. Heavy highway has some very particular things relative to DOT processing, material management, equipment management that you have to be paying attention to. And some vendors don't look at that. So one of the ways you can find this out, besides just the RFP and the demo, is get a look at the client base. Ask them to give you a breakdown of their customer base, not just construction, but heavy civil, mechanical specialty, general builders, and see what their market share is. I mean, if you're a heavy civil with material and heavy equipment, you don't want to go to a vendor that only has 1 or 2 other customers that are like that, because not only would you not likely get good fit, but the product won't be evolving in a direction consistent with heavy civil. So so just pay attention to the kind of contractor you are in their particular marketplace. Okay. For the sake of questions, I'll leave the material around implementation in here. Maybe this will be our second webinar, our third webinar, Sarah, is how to implement ERP, because I think that's another one that could stand its own treatment. Let's do a quick recap, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. ERP is a system you are going to encounter. There's no getting around it. Its importance and position in your organization can vary a little, but you do have to select well. There is a transition going on right now, and I've been here a while, and I would say I've not seen it this robust in the past. It's been more like steady state evolution, 10%, 15% turnover every year, where I think in the next 3 to 5, we're going to see 50% turnover potentially. They are large, complex, and expensive to install. Don't go cheap on the implementation. Get the help you need, because if you don't do it well, it has a ripple for a long time. get operations involved, and definitely think about this as a 10 to 15 year kind of decision. And by the way, I would say that a lot of companies underutilize their ERP. I mean, from the vendors, typically they feel like that their customers are using anywhere between 20 and 30% of the solution, which means that there's quite a lot that you're paying for that may not be taken advantage of. Okay, so with that, I want to save us a few minutes here at the end for some quick questions. Sarah, do we have some questions from the group?
It looks like we have a question now. What are some key triggers that would push an organization to select an ERP versus maintaining status quo?
Good question. I would say that the company's risk profile could be one. Particularly, I mean, if they were publicly traded, they have to be SOX compliant, and maybe a platform they're on isn't. Feeling like if there are a lot of spreadsheets being used around the ERP to support functions, billing, purchasing, job cost reporting, forecasting. If all of this is in spreadsheet, what are you doing? I mean, the ERP is supposed to be there to do those things. And if it's not doing that and you have to use a spreadsheet, that would be a problem. Also, if the ERP doesn't support your data strategy, doesn't allow for you to integrate your processes, doesn't allow you for integrating third-party solutions. I mean, there's a series of things that could push you to basically make a decision to move off. But the age of the tech stack is one that you should be attentive to. By itself, it might not move you off, but in conjunction with some of those other ones, definitely a consideration. Good question.
So there's a question that I hear a lot. How long does it take to select and implement an ERP?
Good one. So if you're on your own without, say, outside guidance, then I would say 4 to 6 months, because you're trying to, shoehorn it in between your day job and maybe don't know exactly the steps to take, and you get a little overwhelmed by vendors and their promotion. When we do them, it's typically three months. Is, I would say, 10 to 12 weeks is common. In a big corporation, like if we were doing a selection in a, say, 500 million to $1 billion company, then it would probably be closer to 4 to 5 months. So, and then implementations, I would say if you're a smaller company, you can count on 6 to 7 months. If you're a mid-sized to larger, is 9 to 12 months. And then if you're very big, it could easily extend beyond a year, but hopefully not too much, because there is something called implementation fatigue. And if your teams are at it for too long, they start to lose interest, momentum, and things start to fall apart. So, Sarah, any last minute questions, or should we close up?
Yeah, if anyone else, it looks like we have one more. What moves you to attribute CMIC moving more to the right in the vendor comparison slide?
Well, they did move to a cloud architecture. They went multi-tenant, which from if you remember back, they weren't there. So I think they've definitely done a better job than some of their competitors on a cloud deployment. Now, that's not a blanket endorsement of everything CMIC, but I would say that their deployment of cloud and their API stack is something that I would say gives them at least mid-ground in that continuum. Okay, well, gang, we're up on time. I can't thank you enough for attending, and hopefully you got 2 or 3 good ideas. Our contact information is up here if you want to reach out to myself or Sarah, and we look forward to having your attendance on a future webinar.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.